feel like there's certain people which I'd want to make rumors up about, but maybe not slander, like
Oh,
directly.
I'll stay away from that behavior.
It's fine. We're all about mischief here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's lovely to have you here, and in your, as we've just discussed, your cozy environment, which is, I'm very jealous of.
Yes, it is. It is ultra cozy. Um, Actually, the fire was like a topic of conversation this morning because my partner was asking, "Well, are you going to get up and take care of the fire during your conversation?" And I said, "Of course I. Let's just get up and go over there." And
Yeah.
he said, "No, no, no." So he came up with like a whole route where he can like sneak through this room without being. And I was like, "That's incredibly considerate, but I don't think you really have to be that sneaky."
I've had people take phone calls during the middle of the show.
I don't think Graham's gonna mind if I like poke the fire for a minute, but he has it all figured out. So I'm gonna leave that in his hands. Very
I
capable.
just like the idea of like a person mischievously like sneaking through a background now. I'm
I
just going to
know.
imagine
At some point, I just start watching a body move across the room. You know exactly what's happening. So that's fine.
there's very few points of like interference in a podcast, and there's usually children. That's usually what interferes with the podcast, or pets.
Right.
But
I have
like,
neither of those.
me neither. I really want a pet, but I just can't bring myself to get one at this point in time.
I'm sort of allergic to everything. So
Oh,
I had to shift towards house plants at a pretty young age because it was very apparent that even if I had wanted to be a dog person, I couldn't be. And cats actually like I stopped breathing.
oh, wow, it's that serious.
Yeah, I mean not if you're around them long enough. Like you can go into a house with a cat. I usually just like load up on Benadryl and then but if I'm like particularly allergic, I lose my voice within like a day and then I start to like really heavy. It's pretty.
That's mad. I recently found out that cats really like me.
Oh,
Like I've never been a cat person. Like as a kid, we were told cats were evil. Essentially, like don't go near them; they'll attack you, that kind of thing. So we were always wary of cats. And then a friend of mine, I go to their house, and I sit down, and within 5 minutes, there's a cat on me, like just sitting on my chest because apparently I'm the most comfy thing in the room whenever there's a cat around, and I don't get it. But
well, it's the beard, I think. So
maybe,
like something to like maybe they think you're a large cat.
maybe, or mistake me for a cushion.
Yeah, exactly.
So he's got a very minimal face. We could just say that. Anyway, we should probably do introductions and start off with the easiest question of the day, which is who are you?
Um, I'm Tanya. Do I do last names? Tanya
You can
Konwinski.
do.
Um, I'm an artist in New York, and I have met Graham exactly one time, which was at a small market I was doing in New York. Actually, to be specific, it was a elementary school cafeteria that
Is
was
that
massive.
what that is?
Yeah,
I didn't even notice that.
yeah. Well, it probably I don't know. I don't know the difference between like UK and US, like elementary school kind of. I don't even. You guys don't even call it elementary school, do you? Maybe.
We we I mean we kind of do. We have like infant school and junior school, and they're basically elementary.
Okay. So that was like a very typical US elementary school cafeteria.
I'm kind of I'm a little blank mind blown because I didn't even notice that that whole thing was a school. I just saw the fencing and just assumed it was like a car park. Like,
That's like
okay,
a full school and to explain a little bit for people who have no idea what we're talking about, there's a thing called Grand Bazaar on the Upper West Side of New York. I think it's been running for over 30 years, or I
well,
should probably know the exact number, but it's like half um, flea market, half market. You have people selling everything from like a teacup that they pulled out of their purse. And then you have people who are coming and selling art and like really truly one of a kind unique dishes and well not dishes like pottery is what I mean. So it goes everywhere from like you can buy something for $1,000 and you can buy something for 50 cents. It's a very strange mix and kind of fun and serendipitous at the same time.
Yeah.
And it's that particular one is run by a nonprofit that all the proceeds go to 4 local schools, which is the school connection. So
I
like
didn't
all
know.
of the rental fees from the people who show there go to support programs in the schools, which is
How, how long have you been doing that then?
I had kind of done like a couple of dates last year sometime. I kept running into like the weather issue of an outside market.
Yeah.
Due to COVID, they hadn't reopened the inside. Turns out is a school cafeteria, and so I had like booked some dates, and I kept having to cancel. All of my work is on paper.
Mhm.
Everything I do is generally speaking just black ink on paper, and the reproductions I've started to do are also paper. And so I was running into an issue. I had to cancel a few rain dates. And then I had to cancel a few hot days because one day I was there and everything started to curl. It was
Oh,
hot out and you're in direct sun. Even if you're under a tent, you were getting so much direct light and at such an extreme angle for whatever reason that the paper just started to like bend like crazy. And um some of the pieces that I had like inside, like I use like a compostable cellophane sleeve for some of my work. And there was precipitation inside the cellophane sleeve because there was such a temperature difference just between the heat and a little bit of air inside the sleeve that it was
it's
like
crazy.
sweating on the inside. I was like, I I felt like I
Really?
could for a while. But what
Yeah.
I was doing, I had like committed and I did like every Sunday for I think it was 3 months,
That's a
which
long, long time. Yeah.
yeah,
Is it-
it was a lot of work. It's one of the so I would get up every morning, load my entire booth setup into a cab, come over to Manhattan at around 7:30 and set up. You work the market and then you break
Mhm.
down entirely, get back in a cab and go all the way back home.
I feel like that's the hidden part of the art world is the amount of extra effort you put in getting stuff to a place just to sell it. Like people like, oh, you spent weeks on a painting or you spent, hours making this illustration. And then they just ignore the fact that you may have lugged a table for like 5 miles or or your stands and stuff didn't just magically appear. They took a lot of time and effort to get there. A friend of mine recently bought a gazebo she does a lot of fabric work. So obviously, again, the elements are always against you
Mhm.
in terms of, especially in the UK, because it's windy as hell every single day. And she was just like, yeah, I bought a gazebo. I took it to one event and it started leaking like at the event. And I was like, yeah, there's just a lot of extra stuff you don't see.
Yeah, and like I had started to get like I have like this bin that I take with me to markets, and it's like everything you could possibly think of, like band-aids, duct tape, hand sanitizer, safety pins, deodorant, like just like every possible thing. And I definitely have become the person at shows where I'm constantly like, oh, I have something for that. Oh, you need a zip tie?
Mhm.
Like, excuse me, I have 3 different sizes. And, but I think it was because I've been doing them all alone.
Yeah.
And there's no one to watch my booth um, if something is needed. So you have to just kind of, you have to completely work off of what you have with you at any
Yeah.
time. And I learned that lesson really fast. Like you'd rather have a few small things and be over prepared than, have to go all day with like a blanket that's tripping people or something. Yeah, if
Yeah.
anyone ever listens to this who's doing markets, safety pins really come in handy.
They do, and you have to learn quick. I found I kind of got fed up with taking so much with me when I did kind of art stands, and I used to kind of do screen print T-shirts and that kind of stuff. So you'd end up with a suitcase of clothing and a suitcase of gear, and I got fed up with doing all that. So when I do fairs now, I do it in like the most simple setup possible, where I have one case, and if it doesn't contain everything, I'm not taking it with me. It has to be in there, and it's just sit on the table, open the case, and I'm good to go. And just sit back.
Thought of that is so nice because I could never do that. I just have between like the cards that I sell and the large prints and
Mm.
other things, it's just not really functional. But I will say that um, compared to when I first started doing markets, which was only about a little over 2 years ago, wow, I really pared down. And it was the best thing ever, realizing that you will never need as much inventory as you hope you will. And
Yes.
it's better to sell out of something than bring 8 times too many and have to lug it back and forth. And I'm a pretty petite person. I'm like 5 feet tall, and um, just the lifting alone became like a big problem. And I was doing a lot of physical therapy last year, and my PT would joke because Sundays were the market, and my first PT appointment of the week was Monday, and he would just call it recovery day because I would every week, and it was like every progress we had made the week before I had totally just fucked on Sunday. So he was like, so when is this ending? When are you gonna stop to yourself? I was like, I'm getting better. I'm getting really strong.
Who needs weights when you have cases and canvases and everything else you need to carry in the world? I think that's what kind of I appreciated about when obviously I ran into you. I think it was like the first time I attended Grand Bazaar. Was go just wandering around since I moved here, trying to find little bits to make space seem homely in some way, shape, or form. And I saw your work, and I loved your work kind of instantly because it reminded me of an illustrator from the UK. He's been long dead now. It's in the 1800s. It was Aubrey Beardsley who did like hard ink illustrations, and for anyone who doesn't know, were influenced by woodcuttings from Japan. So it reminded me of that kind of stuff, which I really loved. But then researching you more, found that despite your stuff being very graphic, you have quite a DIY eco ethic to everything that you're producing, which I found quite unusual because when I meet graphic designers, it tends to be very modern, very tech, very, move everything forward in a modern way rather than kind of take things on themselves.
Yeah.
And I was wondering whether you started with that kind of idea or you've always been this.
Well, I think it really comes back to the fact that I don't I am not, and I definitely have never considered myself a graphic designer. I have no formal training whatsoever.
Right.
So um, I wouldn't even know what direction to go in when it comes to doing this any other way. Um, my art practice has always been just pen on paper in the most painfully rudimentary at times process. And I only sold originals for, I mean, 10, 15 years, something like that. And it wasn't until it was actually maybe about a year before, maybe 2019, that I started really seriously talking about starting a reproduction business. And the only way to go about that for me was to find a way to make it so that I could like, I don't know how to phrase, morally deal with the fact that I was making stuff.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. And I mean, it took me another 2 years before I actually started even printing anything because I was really reckoning with the idea that I just didn't want to create more things.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean, we have stuff, everyone lives with stuff, but I had no intention of ever wanting to create too many duplicates of anything. And I think that's why I liked originals so much, because it was one piece of paper and it represented such like a period of my time spent doing something. And when that goes into someone else's life, it was like them taking a chapter of my life, and it's gone, it's out, but it's just one piece of paper. And while I hope it lasts a long while, it's also something that could very quickly decay into the ground and never be seen again, you know. Um, and so when it came to reproductions, there was, I, even though it was just more paper,
Mhm.
it took like 2 years of deep conversation with my partner, with doing research on um, types of paper that I could be using. I got really in depth with it because I couldn't handle the idea that I was just creating more stuff that was going to end up in a landfill. It makes me
Yeah.
like super to think about actually.
Yeah. I mean,
What's your question? Um, uh, I hope that in a roundabout way at all.
yeah.
Something. Um, but yeah, so that's been kind of my general approach from the start. I mean, I started doing some like mugs last year, and even that was um, honestly like a little bit of a tough pill to swallow. And I only started doing them because literally a friend was closing her business, and she just had a lot of mugs,
Right.
and she didn't want them to end up in a landfill either. And she was like, "Do you want to do these? Do you want to just like make something out of these?" And I was like, "Sure." Because they already exist and they're here in front of me, and we're not sure what to do with 120 mugs. So I ended up making some mugs, and it was like so fun and so cool. Um and I've put like a little bit of a cap on it, and I do everything made to order, so that something's only getting made when it actually
Mhm.
has a destination and a receiver.
Yeah.
Which I personally think, not to get too deep on the eco talk, but I think is sort of the future and also the past. Like that's how the world used to exist a little bit. Like there weren't 25,000 dresses available at all times. You had to go and something was made for you. And um,
Yeah.
at least in some parts of our life, I think we have to move back towards that ethic of waiting
Yeah. Yeah.
and being more intentional with how you're spending your money.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's one of those things I kind of fall with. So when I originally started making work, I was kind of self-employed, just out of necessity that I was unemployed. So it was kind of need to make money quick as possible, and started initially down the line of, all right, cool, I can, maybe produce 100 t-shirts and send those to shops and all that kind of stuff, and quickly lost any enthusiasm for it. Quickly was just like, no, this is the worst way of doing this possible. So then moved more to the more I can do handmade and the more I can do print on demand, at least, just to kind of get around that was the better way of doing it. And I felt much better about making work because, like you say, like just the idea of producing something for it to just exist and then never go anywhere is the worst.
It's not a good feeling.
No.
I actually, and that's partly the fun part about being not just a maker but a small business owner, is like you I'm part of many business groups that which was for me a fun way to find community also during the pandemic, of coming together with other people who were starting small businesses. And uh the one phrase that you hear all the time is like you get to decide what your business is like. And that was such an incredible permission to just be like, oh, I can actually decide that I only want to ship 1 day a week, because that's what actually works with me having to actually live my life and continue to make new work and clean the house
Mhm.
and occasionally eat dinner, And it was an incredible thing to realize, like, you don't, to have a functioning business, you don't have to do it like how anyone else is doing it. You just have to, I think, be really clear about what you are offering and doing. And as long as you're communicating that well, there's no reason to not have it support your life and not become your whole life.
Yeah, I think it adds to the kind of the work which is being made as well. Like, it gives it kind of like a rarity or an incidental like nature when you encounter someone's work and you're like, oh, well, there's only going to be however many people buy of this object, which means if it's hugely popular, it might be millions. But
Yeah.
if 50 people buy it, then that's 50 people who I have in common with me who've produced and gone, oh, I like this. I want to keep this.
I was, even when I first started printing the cards, I was like, well, you can't really do like a limited, well, I guess you can do a limited edition anything, people do it all the time, but I was like, well, maybe there's a way to just cap it so that you say I'm only ever going to make 10,000 of this one card. And I had someone very quickly be like, well, if you're trying to do wholesale, that's a silly idea. And I was like,
Mhm.
but maybe it's just more about like you get to kind of a retirement number where you say, okay, well, there's just enough of that thing now. I'm gonna
Mhm.
just go make something else. And I still kind of toy around with that idea, but my business is so new that I'm definitely gonna have to revisit it. But it's like a thought I always have of like maybe you just reach a point where you just say, okay, well, that was enough of that one, even if it's wildly popular, even if it's
Yeah.
selling well, you can just say, you know, there's opportunity always for something else.
Yeah. I think it forces you to move on a little bit as well. Like some people really get stuck with one design, which they have to do for their entire career, and then they end up hating it. Whereas if you do kind of like a little cap to it, it's like, well, when I reach 100 of these, I'm going to have to start making and come up with something fresh. Otherwise, I have no business.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. And I think as an artist, it lets you tap in more to the idea that what I'm doing is I'm playing here. Like I'm creating because I love creating, and I'm not just creating because I strictly need to sell something in a certain quantity. Um, and that's a refreshing take on how to do design work. I still think all of my cards come from a very fine art back of things. I think everything relates back to my larger works and just the time spent in the studio. And I feel really excited that I get to offer them in a small size. Um, but that was entirely new for me. I had really never worked that small before, um,
Mhm.
which is why it's made me so. I mean, like incredibly just stupid grateful that people like them and that people like you come along and really connect with the work, and it's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of brings us around nicely to what we kind of discussed about talking about today,
Oh
which is,
yeah.
I mean, that's the whole nature of this show. Is you end up chatting about everything. Is these kind of chance encounters is obviously an artist and someone who's out selling work. You've got to have like hundreds and thousands of chance encounters within kind of like a space of a day.
Yeah, certainly. Although sometimes not as many as you'd think. I mean, that's the wild thing about being there out at markets sometimes. I mean, sometimes only one person talks to you,
Mm-hmm.
like in an 8 hour period. And it's like a lot of pressure on that one person because you're way too excited for them to talk to you. But yeah, so I think I was trying, I was really trying to like rack my brain about a topic. And I think what I said was it casual connections?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's funny because this is a topic that has come up in a lot of conversations recently. And you're totally right. It's exactly why we're even having this conversation. Um, and I was even trying to remember exactly because we chatted so briefly. Um, but you had mentioned you had just moved over. I think I offered you a desk.
You did. We kind of we spoke briefly, and then me having you were kind of like the first person I'd spoken to in maybe like 4 days outside of my work, because obviously work's work, but in terms of like a random person in New York who I was chatting to. And obviously I bought a card, and then we were chatting and I mentioned that I make work, and then you were like, oh, I have a desk you can have. And my brain just went, what? Like I'm being offered this desk. You're like, yeah, it's like a glass drawing desk. And instantly my brain went, well, that's very nice, but I also tend to drill into most desks I have. So I'm gonna have to politely decline here.
Um, so that is actually it's a perfect example of the topic for today, which is casual connections. And I love that you pointed out that 4 days is a long time to go only talking to work colleagues. So, and you just moved from the UK. So when you still like started going out like out and about in New York, do you feel like do you get anxiety about that, or do you feel excited to kind of just have moments with people or
I think, I mean, mildly broken as a person. But so I don't react sometimes the way people are meant to react in these situations. Like I feel like moving to the sea, some of it is kind of lost on my personality because I'm not excitable, like outwardly excitable. So like being in New York, my brain isn't like, oh my God, I'm in New York and this is amazing and all that kind of thing. It just kind of settles down. So when I'm looking at new people, I don't get high anxiety about it because I'm very much aware that they have no idea who I am. Like, and I think that's the beauty of a big city is that you end up with a complete confident freedom because there is so many people around that you can just wander around and be like, it doesn't really matter what I do. Like if I trip or I drop my coffee or spill something on myself, it doesn't matter because 10 minutes down the line they're going to be thinking about whatever they're thinking about. So there's a freedom with it, I guess. Whereas coming from the UK, whereas I'm in quite a small city, the chances of meeting the same person twice in one day are very high.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And or seeing them the next week and be like, oh, that was that guy I saw from over there. And then you always get that little bit of edge of anxiety of like, oh, well, if I make a fool of myself now, I'm a fool forever.
The 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 big city thing is like it's the anonymity of
Mhm.
living in that kind of place. Um, I think it's the same when you travel. It's just knowing that you don't have an identity there. And but I will say that I'm from a fairly small town in Northern California,
Right.
um, where I know a lot of people and um a good amount of people know me. Just I grew up right like just a few blocks from like the downtown part of the city. And all my first jobs were in shops right down there and restaurants. And so I got to know quite a lot of folks. Um, but I will find that one of my great reliefs as an adult is realizing that like even if you do something stupid, the truth of it is that most people are always thinking about themselves.
Yes.
And you're gonna hyperfixate, but the no matter what it was you did, they're probably already moved on with their lives. Um, so that's
Yeah.
you can't mess it up too much. Um,
No.
the casual connections thing is I I think I've decided that those kind of just momentary interactions with people are uh is something that I'm not sure I could live without. And the pandemic put such a not to get too COVIDy about the conversation, but
Mhm.
it it definitely put a highlight for me in realizing how much I depend and thrive on very small interactions with people I don't know. Um, and it was, the one thing the pandemic did, especially with the lockdowns and everything, is that it nothing was casual anymore. There was no popping over to someone's house. There was no spontaneous anything really. I mean, everything became incredibly calculated because it had to and it needed to. But it was, we think of all the ways it was isolating in like big ways, but I think it was actually these very small things that you don't think about as you go through your day, like the laugh you have with the barista at the coffee stand, and um, that I've become not fixated on, but I've realized are far more important to just kind of how I want to walk through the world
Mhm.
than I've ever realized. Um, and it took me like 2 years to put a pin on it because I was like, it's not, I'm fine. I think one of the reasons that my partner and I kind of weathered being so isolated during COVID so much is because we are, what's the word? I'm an extroverted introvert.
Right.
So I'm completely fine with a couple years of me just like hunkering down. um, but so it wasn't the big interactions I missed. It was the all the small ones.
Yeah. I
And
definitely agree. Like I mean, it was one of the kind of, I wouldn't say that the small ones were the reasons for kind of like the creation of the podcast in the format that it is. This was originally started out of just conversations I was having with friends, and realizing that the breadth of those conversations was more important than the topic, which we were kind of focusing on, and trying to push that into kind of like a more random encounter with people like yourself, or people which I just look up online and go, I want to speak to them, even if it's just for an hour. I want to find out about them for an hour, and understanding that each one of them has an impact on how you go about your day and the work which you create. And I always think back to, like you were saying, with kind of baristas and people you run into every single day. When you think back through like a week or 2 weeks in your life, and the amount of random people you saw in convenience stores, or spoke to in a shop, or even just stood next to in like a queue at a checkout, and you're not registering at the time, but you are registering at the time kind of subconsciously. Like you'll see something like, like a coat you saw on someone's back, and you're like, oh, I like that coat. But your brain just didn't pick up on it. And then later on, you'll find yourself searching for that kind of thing. And it's those kind of things. And I always think back to kind of like childhood. We've had millions of these interactions within our lives, especially within our formative years. And we just never pick up on it until we, maybe go back home or go visit someone, and you see someone, you're like, oh, wait, that's why I like that thing. Because I saw that every single day and I didn't even think about it. But that's why I like that thing.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Absolutely. And those yeah, it's so you're right. It's not even just the verbal interaction. It's just the even just being in the same space as someone, or watching two other people have like a little moment at the coffee shop sometimes can be, especially if you're in like if you're having kind of a bum day or something, it's watching two other people have kind of like a fun spark moment where they make a joke, or they or just are nice to each other, honestly. It's always a touch point for yourself of like, okay, so I'm feeling bad, but it's momentary or something like that. And especially when I was a kid, I I lived a lot of my life outside of my home. Um, just it was a bit not the best environment. And so at a pretty young age, I shifted a lot of my like living to outside the house. And I give a lot of credit now to the fact that, I was given a lot of like hope for what healthy interactions can look like just based on the grocery store clerk and like really small, seemingly inconsequential human interactions that for me were an incredible breath of fresh air. They weren't laden with issues or anything. It was just like this very pure, often kind way of dealing with people. And, just after I told you the topic, I really started thinking about it. And I was like, I think that has had such a huge impact on me, just knowing that as a kid, and then as a teenager, and then as you become an adult, that no matter what is happening elsewhere, you actually get to decide who you are as a person more in these small interactions than you necessarily do in big relationships, because often there's other things dictating that: history, family issues, things like that. And it's harder to change those relationships, and it's harder to change yourself in those relationships. But if you ever want to work on yourself, start to make the changes of who you want to be with strangers and not first.
Start on the outside and then the inside gradually, like,
Yes, yes.
just,
I
yeah.
think there's something to be said for that, because it's these people don't know you. They're going to take you for whatever you present to them. And so if you're like, it even gives you a break if you're very, very depressed and you just decide, I need an hour where I'm just going to go do something. I'm going to go be something else for an hour. It doesn't make you not depressed, but it does give you this little like window of interaction that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
I kind of like thinking about that.
I like that idea. It's it plays into a phrase which I kind of hate this phrase of like the fake it till you make it phrase.
Oh, I
Yeah,
love that though.
like it adjusts to that, but the way all I can think of in my head is just like it's like you just get to go put on like a very small play just with a stranger. You're like, all right, for this next 20-minute conversation, I'm gonna be great or I'm gonna be terrible. I might put on like an accent. I could wear this hat. I never wear this hat, but they won't know that. They'll think I wear this hat every day. And just like, how much can you trick the person that you're encountering? Because I mean, this is something being in New York I've thought of many times. Like, I have quite a wide class as like a thin UK accent.
Okay.
It's not like the most London accent. It's not the most Northern accent. It's quite thin. So it's like if I just put on like a fake bad American accent, they wouldn't know. They just assume that I'm from random parts of the American.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and you can do that. You know? I think that like there's American accents are so varied.
mm-hmm.
And there's also enough people here who have lived abroad. And like there's definitely those jokes about the Americans who go to the UK and they get like a little bit of an accent.
Yeah.
And they come back and they never lose the little bit of the accent, you know? It's like the I'm trying to think of an example, but I just, but it's totally true. You can give yourself that permission to kind of I mean, not that I'm saying you should go out and change everything about who you are when you're interacting with strangers, but I do think it's a great opportunity to test out new parts of who maybe you want to be as a person or, you know, wear a different style, wear the hat that everyone in your life says looks stupid, but that you love.
Mm-hmm.
You might find someone else who likes it, you know.
Definitely. I think I did a one of my solo podcasts ages ago. Was talking about how many footnotes your story is part of for someone else's bigger story. Like they tell you a story, they were going about their day, something happened, they were off for, there might have been a day or whatnot, but you're in that story and you have no idea that you're being repeated to somebody else down the line of like, oh yeah, I went in and there was this guy. And I'm like, I often wonder how many people are talking about us that we just don't know about, and they don't know who we are because we were just a side character at the time. And I think that I've been playing a fun game in my head of whenever I walk around the city of how many photographs am I in the background of? Because everybody's taking photographs.
All the time,
Yeah.
especially of really inane stuff too, like a street sign or a stop sign. I just stuff that I'm like, I'm sure that this is what I look like in Italy. They're like, it's the side of a building. What are you taking a picture of? You know? Like, but New York you see it a lot, and I'm always so curious, and um, that's really funny. So have you started a tally? Like, do you have a rough estimate of how many pictures you've been in? Because that's pretty funny.
It's kind of like a mental tally at the moment, but I had an idea to do kind of like a mini project around it.
Yeah.
Because I liked this idea. I think I got the idea when I was in Central Park and someone was filming what I can only assume was like a TikTok video or something because they had one of those like ring lights on their phone and they'd set it up and they're doing a dance and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, they were
And
doing the whole
like,
production.
yeah, they were doing like a whole thing, and I was like, I'm just gonna keep going because I don't care what's going on. And I was like, walk through the background. I was like, oh, does that mean I'm on TikTok now? Because I've like I'm in the background of their video,
Yeah.
no one knows who that is. And I was like, that'd be interesting. And it'd be interesting to try and find myself, kind of like a Where's Wally, of
Oh
just
yeah.
going onto Instagram and clicking like New York pictures from today in the area you were in and being
Yeah.
like, can I find myself multiple times?
Actually, I that's exactly where my head went. I was like, I bet facial recognition is gonna get good enough, or maybe it already is. I don't know much about this stuff, but you could do like a search for your face and body and do like a whole project just based on the random corners that you've ended up in.
Yeah. And it's that kind of thing of obviously yours as well, just trying to find out what their perspective of that situation was. Because obviously from my it's like with the person who's doing like the dance, I was just like, from my perspective, I'm seeing this. I don't know what you're doing, why you're doing it, how famous you are, how, insignificant this is in your day, if this is just for your friends, maybe.
Yeah.
And it could have been completely none of those. And the curiosity in me is like, I kind of want to know more. Like,
It's a little bit also like it's definitely like Where's Waldo, but it's also like a little bit like Bigfoot.
yes.
Like the creature in the background. Which maybe I'm only saying because you're incredibly tall.
No, that's just makes me. I literally did a podcast like I think it was maybe last year, or year before, which is it's like I'd rather be Bigfoot if the legendary creatures are like a thing. I have no interest in being like the central character to anything. I want to be just like the mythos, just like wandering through the background.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely probably a more interesting experience anyway. Like I I don't know if you'd ever I'm not particularly interested in being the lead in a lot of things. And I think it's because being the side character, whatever that, I mean, you're always going to be the lead of your own life, hopefully. But uh, if you give yourself the freedom to think of yourself more as just like somebody that pops in, you get to live your life with a lot of abundance because you're like, oh, well, no one's really paying attention to me. I get to I get to experiment, I get to play, I get to do a lot of cool stuff, and then every once in a while I just like pop up and whisk away.
It's like being it's like if you're in a sitcom and you're the neighbor who just like pops over. They get the biggest round of applause
Absolutely.
every single
And then
time.
they get to go home and not be bothered,
Yeah.
which is so nice, generally speaking.
This is the life advice we're giving to everybody is don't get involved in your own life. Just move in for one-liners, give advice, get the biggest applause and then leave.
Well, but you know what? I mean, it does actually kind of connect back to our topic a little bit, which is that there's just as much impact from these brief things than there is from big storylines. And I mean, that's exactly right. It doesn't have to be, I guess it's the difference between needing to write a novel and being okay to write a short story that can have just as much punch to it. Um, and not every relationship needs to be a novel. A lot of them, can just be brief and uh, genuine, you know? Um, and I love that. And it's something I love about New York. And my partner and I have been really struggling with whether we stay in the city for a long time. We've been, just like I think a lot of people in New York, we've been through 3.5, 4 years of just the back and forth of do we stay, do we go, do we stay, do we go? And this topic has come up a lot for me in talking about moving to more rural areas or smaller areas because I have realized how much I enjoy and rely on the ability to just go for a walk and feel momentarily seen by someone and witnessing somebody else. Just having that genuine interaction. And because sometimes you really need it, especially, I mean, do you work from home now?
I kind of like do a mix at the minute. So it's always been the things. But I mean like during pandemic I did 2 years living alone, working from home. So I completely agree. My advice for anyone during pandemic was always just go for a walk. Take 20 minutes. Like that's all you need. Is just get out of your house, go out your four walls, and just go round the block. And even if you like say like you just see someone on your walk, that can be enough.
Yeah. I mean, it's make eye contact, do the nod, do something, anything really. It's I wish I had a more eloquent way to say it. It just seems increasingly important. And when you're younger, especially, I feel like um you get so much interaction because of school.
Mhm.
And then a little bit like in college or university or whatever, it starts to separate just a little bit because they're maybe really focusing on their studies or they have a part-time job or and then But when you really start to move into like adulthood and into your 30s, especially as many people are married and many people have children, the number of interactions you have with the people you actually want to be hanging out with becomes fewer and fewer and fewer. And I've been feeling lately that becoming an adult, whatever that might mean, is really just becoming more and more isolated physically from the people that you want to be hanging out with. I still have just as many close friends who are like family. I've been really lucky with my friendships. I also like they're as important to me as my romantic relationship. Um, but we all live really far apart now.
Yeah.
So what used to be very casual relationships, call somebody up on a Tuesday, go to a bar, whatever. Now it takes 3 weeks to be able to text, to plan, to get on a FaceTime based around work schedules and this and that. And it it's in these moments that I realize even more how much these casual interactions with strangers become important,
Mhm.
because I don't feel unsatisfied in my friendships, but I do feel lonely in them sometimes because they're not around, just like I'm
Mhm.
not around them. And I can see why people
Yeah.
reach the end of their lives and they are very isolated, because all of the things about becoming an adult are a process of distance, I
Yeah.
guess, for lack of a better term. And it's strange, you know? I think I had when you're younger, I didn't have a full appreciation for, even as someone who does not have children,
Mhm.
I always thought it was the kids.
Right.
I just thought it was the kids that made my parents not have time with their friends. I
Yeah.
thought it was us. And it turns out it's not.
No.
It's just adult life. It's having to take care of your home and having to cook dinner so you're not spending a bajillion dollars on takeout and um and work
Yeah.
and and work that you love.
Yeah.
I'm stupid fortunate that I get to do art like as my job and as my
Yeah.
passion, as my like love. But it's it gets more and more isolating, and it's these and it doesn't it's now I'm just rambling, but it
No, I think I mean if I can I'll bring it to a point.
please do.
I think you're right. I think it's very much you it's not necessarily one thing like children, like you say. It's just the responsibilities you gain as an adult take up the time in your life so that when you have interaction with your friends, they become more significant. So it doesn't like it becomes more of an important thing when you lose a friend, you know, rather than kind of like when we were younger, where it's like, oh well, I can take or leave whoever I'm hanging out with in any one day. Um, but I think it becomes amplified the older you get as well, because like as you were talking, kind of thinking along the lines of it is the trope for me is always when you meet someone who's 50 or 60, they've had life and whatnot, and the most important part of the day is talking to the person at the checkout, because they're going to have a conversation with, like when I go to the supermarket with my mum, she refuses to use self-scan because she likes to have a conversation with the person at the checkout. And when you meet even older people who are in like their 70s and 80s, their weekly trip to town to go get whatever they're going to get, maybe their pension, is the most invaluable time. And I think as we get older and as we progress, the key is just remembering that so you don't isolate yourself too much.
Absolutely. It's I those are such good examples. And it really is like it's sort of like the if those old friendships of your lives, the ones those people that know you so well and they're like family to you, you know, those are the real stuff of life, right?
Yeah.
But you can't all live in a commune. Well, maybe you can. You can like together all the time doing your life. Um, and so you need all of the other little ones to keep you sustained. And It's exactly right. It's in some ways it's just as important as the big friendship. Because everyone needs it. The checkout person needs it just as much as the person going in the line. Um, because otherwise, I mean, I think we'd all be a lot more lonely. And I think that's what we're coming out of collectively as a world, is that all of those casual interactions were just, it wasn't like they went away slowly. They went away overnight.
Mhm.
And I don't think there's an active appreciation necessarily for how important these interactions are. Because you don't think about them,
Yeah.
you
And
know?
they just occur. And
Yeah, they just occur, and the naturalness of them, and the kind of like momentary joy in having this, like, somebody's being a total ass and you make eye contact with somebody else in line and you both just kind of like have a moment of like, what a dick, you know? Even just having that moment can be really important because it's like this touch point of like,
yeah.
Lord, you know? Um, and when that went away, um, I think it had a much greater impact on my life that I even realized until now. Because I'm like, wow, why am I suddenly so excited to go to the coffee shop? It's not the coffee. It's
Mhm.
it's that brief interaction, and it just like I get genuinely amped up to like go to leave my house for 2 seconds. It was
Yeah.
the reason that um I did not make a lot of money doing Grand Bazaar for 3 months.
Mhm.
And I looked forward to it every week. And it became incredibly clear to me that it was a lifeline for me. It was not about sales. It was just about if someone was available for the interaction. Not everyone is. A lot of people walk through the world like super closed off.
Yeah.
Um, Especially at markets. They think that if you're going to talk to them, they're just going to be sold to.
Yeah.
It's really not how I operate. I don't believe in trying to convince someone to buy a piece of my art. You don't need to buy from me for me to have a perfectly lovely conversation with you. Some
Exactly.
people walk through markets, because you've sold there, like they walk through with like a wall up.
Mhm.
I think is a little unfortunate.
It
Um,
is. I think if there's advice to give anyone, because I mean, it's easy to put the wall up. I think that's the way kind of people think of it. And obviously, especially if you are very introverted as well, the wall up is your protection against everything else. And yeah, I think if the encouragement around this kind of topic is just appreciate the casual conversation, appreciate those like brief moments,
yeah,
and think that you don't necessarily have to be yourself if you do end up in a situation like that. You
yeah,
could be whatever you want to be.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And it's a very permissive thought that, although I think we're talking about it even in terms of like you have like an actual conversation with someone, I actually think it's even a little bit smaller than that. Like
Mhm.
I was thinking back to, I I had like a very isolated summer one time. I was living in a state that I didn't have any friends and I didn't have anyone around really. Um and I was incredibly isolated uh and very shy. Like
Mhm.
I was much much quieter and shy when I was in my early 20s, and um I would have such intense anxiety to actually just to go to the coffee shop and order coffee. But at the same time, it was like, I keep using coffee as an example. Clearly I have a caffeine thing.
We all do. It's fine.
um but there were times where me standing in line and ordering the coffee, just like those 5 words, like I'd like a small black coffee, were the only words I was speaking to another human for maybe that whole week.
Mm.
And I I think that's why, when I was working as a server and have been in any kind of these like public facing things, I've always thought back to that summer, because you really never know what's happening with someone on the other end. And from my perspective as the one who's like receiving that interaction, I always took it as a great responsibility to not bring my own bad mood into any interaction, because it could be the first time that someone's talking. Like,
Yeah.
not just interacting with someone. Like, I went through such period of isolation that I like wasn't even making sound because I had no one to talk to.
Yeah.
And if you've ever experienced that, it's a pretty profound thing to go from like literally no sound out of your lips to talking.
Hmm.
And it can feel very vulnerable, and like you just never know what somebody is coming from. Um, and so I sometimes think that like those small interactions, you almost have a greater responsibility to present your kindest self, because what if somebody was in that position and you were just a total dick to them?
Hmm.
Imagine what that could do to their week. Or not that that's your responsibility, people need to
No.
process their own emotions, but I do think it's an opportunity for you to decide how you want to walk through the world.
Yeah. And I think it kind of the other side of that is, I think it's very important to not let negative interactions you have cling on to you, because like you say, you don't know what they're going through. And it's when you run into someone who is being a dick, being a complete asshole, like, yeah, but I don't know what got going on at home. I don't
Yeah.
know what their day's been like. I don't know how they got to this mood.
Yeah. But it's probably
So
not.
yeah, it's probably not me. Like
I certainly am doing myself no favors if I take what they're giving me and decide to internalize it. And
exactly.
that's where that balance between having like the protective wall up, um, you have to just kind of get to know yourself really. And you're like, there's a difference between protection and just a complete shutdown,
Yes,
That's
definitely.
actually a really good point, and I love that because emotional regulation is not easy.
No,
And if somebody is having a particularly tough time in life, God bless them. I mean, well, not, but
you don't want to make it worse. That's
yeah, it's not your responsibility to take on their bad mood.
you can't carry that baggage from. That's all it is. I think that's a good point to kind of round this out on to
Oh,
cover our whole topic. I do have one last question though, which I'm asking of all guests this year, is as someone who's obviously involved with the world, having these conversations and whatnot, who should I invite on the show next?
oh gosh. Okay.
And
Um,
I will try to reach out regardless of how big or small they are.
do I have to answer in real time?
You,
Oh,
it's the end topic because I put people on the spot.
the end topic. Well, my friend Ashley's pretty cool.
Okay,
I think she's a really interesting person to talk to. She's an actress.
right.
Uh, that's how I know her. We went to acting school together in New York. Um, uh, yeah, I think she's an interesting person to talk to. I always walk away from conversations with her, like thinking a little bit more deeply about the world. Um,
Sounds like a prime candidate for the show.
yeah,
Yeah,
she's really lovely. She's dry as hell, which I deeply appreciate because I am a tad bubbly, and I feel like she levels me out a little.
I mean, everyone seems bubbly to me because I'm from the UK. So
I think you have a little bubble in you, just by doing this kind of show, and by my only initial impression of you was just that you were very warm.
you got to take the interactions in a positive one. That's all you
Yeah,
can do. But
absolutely.
yeah, I mean, if I can find out how to contact Ashley, I will.
I'll put you in touch.
Put me in touch. But it has been lovely chatting to you today.
Thank you. I hope I didn't go too heady on anything. I tend to do that, but
The main thing I like about the show is that I don't set a time. Well, I set a time of about an hour, but I don't really set boundaries on what we discuss because like I said, with the initial conversations I had was, I like that we could go from discussing one thing, which is simple, like movies,
yeah.
and end up in, geopolitical discussions about whatever's going on in the world. And I think that's like we've been saying, that's the beauty of all these. You never know where you're going to end up.
I think that we were talking about small interactions, and I like that a lot of what we talked about today was, just very simple. And I think that's pretty cool.
thank you for coming on, and we'll call it there and talk to these guys later.
Okay. Bye.
There's my stop recording.
Yeah.